Welcome everyone. Great to see you all here today. It's been a while for me, so it's always nice to see some new faces and faces we're used to seeing quite often here. So thank you for joining us again. Our chat today will be about love, but before I start, I just wanted to remind you all that we have a good friend from the Spiritist Federation of the state of Mato Grosso in Brazil. He'll be joining us here on August 28th. It's a Wednesday in the evening, starting at 6:30. We'll have some food, some lunch. Not lunch. We'll have some food, some snacks, and I believe 7:15 we'll start the chat. And we'll have translation as well into English. He doesn't speak English, so talking Portuguese, but we'll have translation to English. And so that's Wednesday, not this coming Wednesday, but the next one. And then also we have, my mom made some really delicious cake for you guys outside. So after the meeting, if you want to purchase one, they're $10 each, and it's a big and nice strawberry. It's a Brazilian dessert. It's really good. It's really good. And you can pay with cash, e-transfer, credit card, and PayPal. Many ways. Just let us know. Okay. And we also had our barbecue last weekend, so hopefully you're able to join us there. I heard it was really good, and you guys had a great time, so thank you all for participating. And to start off today, I'm going to read a text. Forgot in my laptop. But it's a text by Chico. There's a book from Chico Xavier called Mediunidade e Sintonia, or Mediumship and Harmony, and it's written by the Spirit Manual. And in chapter 15, he brings us a good reflection upon doing the good. And that's the text that we'll start with today. He says that the title is In Goodness, Today and Always. If you truly aspire to collaborate in construction of the divine kingdom on earth, do not solemnize evil, so that goodness may germinate and spread throughout the great field of life. In the face of the stones of misunderstanding, do not renounce the sacrificial plow of tolerance, so that the pebbles of cruelty may become the foundations of the spiritual edification to which we're committed. In the thorns of gratuitous persecution, do not stray from patience, so that the ingredients of the test, little by little, become fertilizer for the planting of the imperishable values of the soul to which you dedicate yourself. Do not interpret anyone as an enemy. When adversaries do not reveal themselves to us as instructors, they're sick people in need of support and understanding. Everywhere we go, we will become confronted by those who do not really know us, and who, judging us by superficial impressions or by the opinions of others, become instruments of our difficulties. Sometimes they appear in the position of companions who demand demonstrations of heroism or holiness from us that they themselves do not yet possess, or in the form of censors who disapprove of our presence and work without considering the objective of our demonstrations. Let us receive them all with the serenity of love, and let us continue the task of goodwill, in the certainty that time will speak for us, today, tomorrow, and always. Every time evil seeks you out, Put on the armor of good and help it to renew itself in an edifying experience. Do not transgress. Imagine if Jesus had adopted the reaction of wounded dignity. The appeal to justice would have extinguished the splendor of the good news. However, the silence and sacrifice of the Divine Master, even today, as yesterday, and as will occur in the future, inspires learning and sublimation for all humanity. So, this text summarizes a little bit what we'll be talking about today. Hello, welcome. And now we'll do a quick prayer and then we'll start. So let us close our eyes. And for those of you who know Chico Xavier, there's a famous prayer from him, from his Spirit Guiding Manual, called Our Prayer. And that's the one that I'll be doing today. So if you know Chico, you can, instead of my voice, you can picture his voice saying these words. And if you want to close your eyes. Lord, teach us to pray without forgetting our work, to give without looking at whom, to serve without asking for how long, to suffer without hurting anyone, to progress without losing simplicity, to sow good without thinking about the results, to forgive without conditions, to march forward without counting obstacles, to see without malice, to listen without corrupting the speaker, to speak without hurting, to understand others without demanding to be understood, to respect others without claiming consideration, to give our best, in addition to performing our own duties without charging fees of recognition. Lord, strengthen in us the patience towards the difficulties of others, just as we need the patience from others towards our difficulties. And help us above all to recognize that our highest happiness will invariably be the fulfilling of your plans wherever and however you want, today, now, and always. So be it. Okay. So, the house is almost full today, so I'm expecting or hoping to get some interaction with you all. Please, you don't have to raise your hand or anything. You can just start speaking. It's more of a conversation rather than a lecture. And today we'll be talking about Spiritists love one another. And we're bringing some references from a few books, some that I could find here. We got a passage from Paul and Stephen, which is a book from Chico Xavier, a very famous one. Highly recommend. I'd say my favorite out of all the Spiritist books. This one that I just read, Mediumship and Harmony. This one I just started reading. It's called Christian Agenda. It's a very simple book from André Luiz, who's the spirit through Chico Xavier. Very quick chapters and very practical guidance and advice, and always the two big ones, The Gospel According to Spiritism and The Spirit's Book by Allan Kardec. And to start, and also some passage from the Corinthians, the letter to the Corinthians that Paul wrote when he writes a poem about love. So that's the one we'll bring here today as well. And the love that we'll be talking about here today is not necessarily the romantic love, but the love that we feel towards others, towards our friends, people we don't know, who we know. And the intent is for it to be very reflexive, so we can think about what we feel in our hearts. And that's why we're bringing 3 questions that we don't have to answer, but just for us to reflect upon in the beginning here. If we can start thinking about these things throughout our chat. One of them being, what is the feeling of love? Do I understand what that feeling is? And that's where we'll bring the passage from Paul to help us understand. What areas of my life might be missing some love? What are some aspects of our lives that could use a little bit of love? And then the last one, which is connected to the title of our talk, is it easy to love one another? We've got a simple task to do. Is it something that we try to achieve? And to start, which is the title of our talk, it's a passage that we have in this book here. It's called The Gospel According to Spiritism, and it's a very famous passage in the Spiritist world that says, Spiritists, love one another. This is the first teaching, meaning, what's the first? That's the first thing that we should aim towards. So if we were to summarize all the books that we have around Spiritism, this would be the first teaching. There is a famous medium in Brazil called Franco, and he was asked once to summarize the Bible. A person came to him asking, can you summarize the Bible? It's such a long book, can you just summarize it quick for me? And then he said, I can do a pretty good job of summarizing it. I can summarize it into only one word, and that word is to love. If I could summarize everything that Jesus taught us, it would be to love. Hence, here we have love one another as being the first teaching. Now, do you guys remember perhaps who wrote this in this book? It wasn't Kardec. It was someone else. Any ideas? Hints?
Multiple choice question.
Good. Was it St. Augustine?
Mm-hmm.
Was it, what's the other one? Fenelon? Was it the Spirit of Truth? Or was it, what's the other one that brings a lot of, Paul?
Paul.
I think it was Paul?
The third.
The third? Spirit of Truth?
Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah, it was the Spirit of Truth. Now, does anyone remember who that is?
It's not just one, right? It's a collective.
Oh, really?
So the collective one is something that Emmanuel brings to us. The explanation that the collective is what they call the Spiritus.
Oh,
Yeah, that would be like the collective of the spirits that helped bring us the Spiritist doctrine. The Spirit of Truth is in fact Jesus. And we can see this actually in the Bible, in John chapter 14 or 26, I think, when Jesus is telling us that he will help us by bringing a consoler to us later in life, and that the Spirit of Truth will be the one that will help bring this consoler to us. The consoler being Spiritism, and the Spirit of Truth being Jesus. And so the Spirit of Truth brings to us 5 or 6 texts in this book. In the medium's book, he also brings 1 or 2, and in there he actually says his name, Jesus. So it was him telling us to love one another. Again, just expanding or reminding ourselves of everything that he had already taught us, that we just needed perhaps a reminder. And he goes on to say, drink from the living spring of love and prepare yourselves, to someday freely and joyfully throw yourselves into the chest of the one who created you weak so that you could become perfect, and who wills for yourself to knead your pliable clay so that you may be the artisans of your immortality. So here Jesus is telling us to drink from the fountain of love, to basically to find our energy, our will in love, so that we can be the artisans of our own immortality. So we can basically find the power within to evolve. And Joanna Jangelis, who is the spirit guide of Victor, she also talks about how love is the food for the soul. That's what brings the food and brings the warmth and the care to our own soul. That's what love is. And so to start talking about love, then we thought, well, why not use the first book from Spiritism, which is the Spirit's book. In the section 3 of the book, we have what we call the natural laws. So Kardec goes on to explain a few of the laws, and the last one that he brings, it's called the law of justice, love, and charity. He brings the idea of justice, what is justice. He brings the idea about charity, and then he explains to us that with justice, with charity, for them to exist, for us to be able to be just, for us to be able to be charitable, we need love to be there, for those two virtues to exist. And as a result, in question 879, Kardec asks the spirits, what would be the character of those who practice justice in all its purity? So what does it mean to practice justice? What does it mean to practice a pure justice? And the spirits tell us to look at Jesus. Again, they say, they would be truly just and would be following Jesus' example because they would practice both charity and love towards their neighbor, without which there is no real justice. So we're going to start talking a little bit about justice now. And it's telling us that we can't really do justice without love. Now we can start reflecting a little bit about this and reflecting about things that might have happened in our lives, within ourselves, when we're talking about justice. If we have that feeling of always seeking justice or demanding justice from others, wanting others to always be confined to what we think they should do and should be, that starts to what's the word I'm looking for? To harden our hearts. It starts turning us into someone who's very uncompromising, someone who's very strict, someone who has a very tough heart. And because we're trying to practice justice without love. So we can become very, very strict, very harsh, very impatient. That's the importance of bringing love to justice. If that makes any sense, we can think or reflect about when we see someone doing something wrong towards ourselves, towards someone else. What is the first feeling that comes to mind? Is it that they need to be punished because they need to do what's right, or they need to be justice, and so on and so forth? Or do we bring a little bit of love towards that, in the sense that we start feeling some compassion towards them, understanding that they made a mistake. Of course, they need to learn, but what is that first impulse that we have? Is it from a heart that's trying to punish them, to demand justice, or is it from a heart that's trying to be compassionate? And stay with that thought, stay with that feeling, because we're going to bring a reflection about what Jesus said. When we're thinking about, we always bring a reflection here that talks about the circle, the vicious circle in a way. So when we're trying to bring justice out of a place of hatred, out of a place of punishment, punish someone, we're just feeding the fire, right? It's we call it like the circle of the vicious circle. You're trying to fix something that's wrong out of hatred. So you're simply just throwing more logs into the fire as opposed to throwing some water. So the way to get out of this cycle of hatred, this cycle of wrongdoing, is to bring understanding, is to bring love, is to bring this idea that will break the cycle into something that comes out of love, comes from love, and not from hatred. So, having said all that, in this book, it was the very first text that we read today. At the very last sentence, Emmanuel brings a reflection about Christ. He says that imagine if Jesus had adopted the reaction of wounded dignity. Wounded dignity, we can think about it as orgulho ferido, or uma dignidade ferida. When someone did something bad to us, did something that they shouldn't have done, we have our wounded pride, right? We're hurt. How dare do they do this to us, right? So what Emmanuel's saying is, if Jesus had adopted the reaction of wounded dignity, so if every time someone hurt Christ, or every time someone said something that wasn't just to Christ, if he had reacted, that's what he's saying there. So imagine if Jesus had reacted every time someone did something wrong to him. He says the appeal to justice would have extinguished the splendor of the good news. Saying that this appeal to make justice with his own hands would have released, would have diminished or extinguished all the splendor that we have from the good news. They say that the silence and the sacrifice of Jesus, even today, as yesterday, as will occur in the future, is what inspires the learning and the sublimation of all humanity. So it's that sacrifice, is that silence that Jesus brought to us, that still today he keeps on inspiring us. Emmanuel brings the reflection that if he had, reacted every time, we might not to this day be inspired and be learning from him, because it wouldn't have been that impactful. So that's something for us to think and reflect within our own selves. How do we feel when, for example, we have some wounded dignity, when someone does something to us that's not correct, that shouldn't have happened? What's that first instinct?
To judge.
Yeah. Very quick on that note, right? And then usually followed by some sort of punishment. That person deserves this, and that. And that's not to say that Christ was always silent in the sense that he wouldn't say anything. He would always teach. He would always bring some teaching around it. But he will always invite people to reflect and to think about what they did, as opposed to punish them, as opposed to try and react. And here, if you all remember, there's a passage in John from Christ. It's a passage where the adulterous woman comes and And Jesus is at the town square. And then this Pharisees, Spiritists, they come with the woman and they throw the woman into the middle of the square. And they want to stone her because she was an adulterous woman. She had committed a crime. And then they look at Jesus and say, okay, Jesus, so what does your law say about this? Right? Because the law of Moses says we should stone her. And instead of reacting to that, what he did was he started to basically write some of the things that the Pharisees had done that weren't correct. In doing so, he invited those Pharisees to think about what they had done and think whether or not they were in a position to judge, because they also had done some wrong things. So after Jesus started writing the things that they had done in the sand, then he said, right, those who haven't sinned before, those who hasn't sinned, cast the first stone. So you can cast that stone of judgment, of punishment, if you haven't sinned in the past. Well, surprise, surprise, we all have, right? So no one's in a position to throw that stone, right? And so they actually all left. And then Jesus came to the woman and said, look around you. Did anyone condemn you? And then she looked around and said, no one condemned me for what I had done. And then Christ said, well, so I don't condemn you either. Now go and sin no more. So he wasn't focused on the punishment, but he was focusing on the learning, or on the opportunity that she has, that now that she realized what she had done, that she can go forward and sin no more and improve, right? Not sticking to the past, but using the past as an opportunity for her to learn and improve her future. So Christ did not condemn her. And so that's on the justice part. On the charity part, since this is the law of justice, charity, and love, there's also a passage in the Spirit's book that talks about charity. And Kardec asks, so what does it mean? What is the true meaning of charity as Jesus understood it, as Jesus was trying to teach us? And there's three things that they say. In Portuguese, we call it the BIP, BIP, which is benevolência, indulgência e perdão. And here it's almost the same. So you have benevolence towards everyone, indulgence towards the imperfection of others, and indulgence in English, the modern connotation of the word indulgence is not what it means here. When they say indulgence, they're talking about patience towards the imperfection of others, and forgiveness for the offenses. So that would be the true meaning of charity. And then just a little bit later, there's a commentary on a question that says, true charity is always good and benevolent. It is demonstrated both in the act itself, so both in the act of doing something charitable, but also in the way that it's done. And that's the very important piece here. It's how the charity is done. Are we doing something just to give it something to someone, or are we trying to help them improve, trying to teach them something and help them? And this was brought to us by St. Vincent de Paul. And so now we know a little bit more about justice, about charity, and now we're going to start thinking about love a little bit more. And I think it was about a month and a half ago, I brought a passage from Rumi, who's a Persian poet from the 13th century, and when he was talking about love. And he said that your task is not to seek love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it. That's an interesting way of thinking about it. And I guess a place for us to reflect. What are some of the barriers that we're putting in ourselves that prevents us from loving someone. In the sense of, perhaps when someone did something wrong to us, and let's say they robbed us, they cheated on us, or whatever it may be. Sometimes we think, well, they don't deserve my love because they did something bad to us. They deserve to suffer. They deserve to feel some pain because they caused me pain. So these thoughts, they're all barriers that we're putting onto ourselves that prevent us from love. And if we think about it, we were created, right, by our Creator, out of love, for love, and by love. Right? So deep down we are love. We sometimes, quite often, we create these barriers that prevent us from expressing that love that we might have inside of us. And the idea that, again, André Luis brings on this book to us, he says that in every earthly creature there is light and shadow. And here, that's why he's saying the earthly creature. There's always light and shadow. Because right now, here on earth, there isn't a perfect spirit. I can pretty sure guarantee that amongst us here, there isn't a perfect one. So we're all evolving, we're all learning. As a result, we all have our lights and we all have our shadows, right? And that Luis actually, that's from Christian Agenda, this book. And that Luis said, highlight your nobility so that the nobility of others may come to you. So as we're starting to practice love, to highlight our love, to highlight good actions, to highlight compassion, the nobility of others will also show up. Because according to the law of attraction, that's what will attract more and more, right? Exactly. Whatever you put out there to the world, you'll receive it back. Right? Jesus actually has a passage that I forget now where it came from, but he talks about the fact that we'll be judged on the same token that we judge others. Right? And we're going to look at some examples here. And this is from the book Paul and Stephen. And hopefully some of you have read it. This is the story about Paul of Tarsus, who wrote, the majority of the New Testament, the letters from Paul, and also Stephen, who was a Christian, a very devout Christian, that in a way inspired Paul, but not in the beginning. So, for those of us who have read the book and remember, so Paul was a very faithful follower of the laws of Moses at the time. He had a lot of power, he had a lot of money, he had a lot of influence, and he didn't agree with Christianity, he didn't agree with Christ, and as a result he was chasing down Christians at the time, ordering them to be killed, and so on and so forth. And then he met Stephen, who was a Christian, a very good Christian, and I would say that Paul got a little jealous of Stephen, because when he saw Stephen in the church, he saw that Stephen had nothing, but he had peace within him. And Paul just couldn't get that out of his head. He was like, how can that person that has nothing have the peace that I really want and don't have? So that was like a thorn in Paul's body, and in a way, perhaps he was jealous of Stephen in that. And so he embarked on a quest, right, to try and kill all Christians, to the point where he got to finally get Stephen and send him to be stoned. So he ordered Stephen to be stoned, and Stephen was stoned to death. But he didn't die there where he was being stoned, because Paul had found a lady called Abigail. Is it Abigail? Yes. Okay, thanks. Abigail, and he fell in love with her, and they were going to get married. And then Abigail, when she saw Stephen being stoned, she realized, that is my brother. So Stephen was actually the brother of Abigail, and then Abigail asked mercy from Stephen, from Paul. Let Stephen go. And then he did, but he was too wounded to survive, and so he did end up passing. But what I want to, this whole story is, I want to bring a passage that Stephen said in his deathbed. So just picture this. You have, in a room, you have Stephen lying on the bench, and he was about to die, right? It was his last minutes. And then you have Abigail by his side, who's his sister, and they've been separated for many, many years. And then Paul walks into the room. So there you have Stephen about to pass. You have Abigail, his sister, and then Paul comes in, who's the person who ordered Stephen to be stoned. And then Stephen looking at Abigail, and also looking at the person who ordered his death. Right? He said, "May Christ bless you." Stephen talking. "I do not have an enemy in your fiancé." The fiancé being Paul. So he says, "I do not see Paul as my enemy. In him I have a brother." Right? So again, the person who just had ordered him to die. He said, Paul, must be good and generous. So these were the feelings of Stephen towards the person who basically killed him. Saul must be good and generous. He defended Moses until the end. So he was a very faithful person, right? Because he was defending the law of Moses. And that's the famous one. Imagine what he will do when he meets Christ. Right? So he never stopped feeling hopeful about Paul. Even though Paul had done all these atrocious things, he could see in Paul some virtues. And that's what he chose to focus on. Right? Stephen could have told Abigail, "Don't marry this guy. He's chasing Christians. He's killing people. Go away. He's not good news." Right? But no. So Stephen decided to focus on the virtues that Paul had, which was the fact that he was good, he was generous, and he was very faithful and loyal to Moses. So if you followed Moses' law, he was your best friend. Right? So he was very loyal. And then he said, imagine what he'll do when he meets Christ. Right? So he was always hopeful. In the midst of all that chaos, he was always hopeful. So that's a great clue, I guess, that we can take from this, to find love, to build love, or to remove those barriers that we might have around love. When we're in a situation, when we're seeing someone that did something wrong to us, right, and we feel some sort of hatred. This exercise that Stephen is telling us is what are some of the virtues that person has? Even though they did something wrong to us, they still have some good things. You know, they still have some good feelings, some good actions. What are those? In this book, again, Christian Agenda, André Luis talks about this. He says that it is always so easy to observe evil and identify it. Right? So quick, so easy to identify evil in other people. However, what Christ expects from us is the discovery and cultivation of good, so that divine love may be glorified. And wasn't that what Stephen did right there?
I think it's a great example, like, of like love your enemies,
Yeah.
right? Because one of the questions, like, how from your initial slide was how do we love, or
Yeah.
something like that. And I was only thinking, like, it's very easy to
Yeah.
love your family member, your
Mhm.
mom, your dad, your kids, but love someone that does wrong by you.
Mm-hmm.
And this is like he was dying, and he was just saying, like, if he did that
Mm-hmm.
for Moses' law, when he meets Christ, like, he's faithful, he's
Yeah.
loyal, and he will be a great person,
Yeah.
and forgiving and letting go. So,
Exactly.
and we know, like, this is actually what happens,
Yeah.
right? And when you see the transformation in Damascus, and
Mm-hmm.
he becomes blind, and then, like, he starts seeing with his soul and not with, like,
Yeah.
with his material body. And I think it's just like a great example on how you can find
Mm-hmm.
always something to focus on and something to love, even though you think this person is not lovable.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And all the time when I see these atrocious things that happens in the world all the time, and I really try. I feel like, how can I love? How
Mhm.
can I pray, not for the one that is dying, but the one that is ordering
Yeah.
the killing? How can I really not feel angry
Mhm.
towards whatever? And it's quite a difficult
It's
task.
tough. It's tough. It's not easy, right?
No.
We're not Stevens yet, but we're trying to learn from him. Right?
Oh my God.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jude. I think there's a slide where I bring about what happened to Paul after he met Christ. I don't know if we'll get there, but thank you. And so, since we're talking about Paul, this hope that Stephen had towards him, imagine what he'll do when he meets Christ. It did happen, right? Paul did meet Christ, and he became, I would say, one of the pillars of Christianity that brought Christianity to different parts of the world. Right? If you look at the New Testament, the majority of the writings is all from Paul, and he actually never met Christ. Right? So he became a very faithful follower of Christ. So, in his words, when we think about what is love, we can use this. Sometimes I call it like the ode to love, or the poem of love, where in this passage to the Corinthians, and it's interesting to hear the fact why, or one of the reasons why Paul wrote this letter to the Corinthians, because he had gone to Corinth, he had preached, and then he stepped away, and then he realized after a few years that people in Corinth were, even though they all heard what Paul said, they started to be Christians that, I follow Jesus, I follow Paul, or no, I don't follow any of them, I follow Moses, and so on and so forth. So they started to segregate themselves into small little clans, if you will, and that some disagreements started forming. So then he sent this letter to the Corinthians, telling them, actually quite forceful, that you shouldn't be. You can segregate if you want, but the lesson is not to be. How can I say? Disagreeing with one another, but always to look for love. And in this passage he wrote about love. He said, "I may speak in different languages of people or even angels, but if I do not have love, I'm only a noisy bell or a crashing cymbal." So it doesn't matter how many languages I speak, no matter if I can speak to the angels. If I don't have love, everything that I say will be empty. It will just be noise. He says, "I may have the gift of prophecy. I may understand all the secret things of God and have all knowledge. And I may have faith so great that I can move mountains. Even if with all these things If I do not have love, then I am nothing. Right? That's this shirt that we have here at FSS. It says, if I didn't have love, I wouldn't be anything. So he says, it doesn't matter if you're a great medium that has the mediumship of prophecy. It doesn't matter if you understand all the secret things about God, if you know the gospel inside out. If you don't have love, he's basically saying, if you don't have love, you're nothing. I may give away everything I have, and I may even give my body as an offering to be burned, but I gain nothing if I do not have love. This is his call out to charity. He says that even if I have everything, and I give everything away to others, if I even give my body, if I don't do it out of a place of love, it's almost as if I hadn't given anything. And then a few other things that he says characterizing love. That love is patient and kind. That love is not jealous, it does not brag, and it is not proud. And if you start thinking about Jesus, you can see all of these things in him. He's not. Love is not rude, is not selfish, it does not get upset with others. Love does not count up wrongs that have been done. Right? And this is what we were talking about before with Christ through justice. Love takes no pleasure in evil, but rejoices over the truth. Love patiently accepts all things. It always trusts, it always hopes, and it always endures. So, the best thing about love, about trying to seek love, about trying to love others, the biggest beneficiary of all this is ourselves, right? We're not doing this for others, we're doing this for us, because it is truly a blessing for us. And I don't want to take too much long, but when it comes to forgiveness, when it comes to justice, there's a person that did a sermon back in the day. I think it was in Louisiana. I can't remember, but it was. He went around and did the same sermon a few times. I'm talking about Martin Luther King Jr. He gave a really beautiful sermon around loving your enemies, and he had a lot. Right? He was a person who was being persecuted and voicefully accused or abused. And so he had a lot of enemies. He had the, if he wanted, he had the opportunity to hold a lot of grudge towards people, because a lot of people was verbally abusing him. And then he gives a talk saying, loving your enemies. And what I like about this talk is the fact that he comes from a place of, he has the moral to say this, because he was experiencing a lot of opportunities to love others, right? It's very easy to say love your enemies if you don't have any enemies, right? But he had a lot, so he comes from a place that he lived it. He experienced it. So he says, sometimes it's tough to understand how we can possibly love our enemies. And I'm not going to say the entire sermon because it's too long, but there is a couple things that he focuses on. And the first thing he talks about is to understand a little bit about love. And he actually goes back to the Greek to help us explain a little bit about love, because it's such a overarching virtue that sometimes it's tough to understand. So the Greek, they separate what love means. He talks about the love, what's called eros, E-R-O, related to a romantic relationship. It's the most rudimentary part of love. Then you have something that's called philia love. Again, Greek. This philia love is related to loving our family members, to loving our friends, to loving people that have the same thoughts and ideas that we have, right? So again, easier love to go through. And then there's the last one, which is called agape, which is the third type of love. And this is the one that's the tricky one, that's the tough one. He says that agape, this love, is understanding, is redemption, is goodwill for all men. It is love that seeks nothing in return, and it's overflowing. It's a love where we no longer put barriers to it, because that's why he says it's overflowing, because we don't have any more barriers towards it. And when you rise to love on this level, you begin to love men not because they're likable, not because they think as you do, not because they look like you, not because they have the same tastes as you do, but simply because God loves them. That's enough. Right? That's should be enough when we get there. You look at every man and you love him because you know God loves him. That's it. We don't need to put any conditions to love someone. Well, I will love you because you did this or because you did that. No, love should be something very free. That just because you're a person, because you're created by God, because God loves you, that's in itself is enough for me to love that person. And that's words that he lived by. One other time I'll bring his sermon to explain more a bit about what where he was coming from. But this was basically the conclusion that he arrived. And to end in a way, I'm going to end with the start. And this is where I wanted to bring what Jude brought, is when Paul met Christ and had that epiphany that he realized, Christ is love, and that's the path they should follow. The minute that he realized that, he went blind. And one of the interpretations, why did he go blind after he had that realization? One of the interpretations could be he went blind because his focus at that moment was to look within. It wasn't to use the teachings of Christ to go out and start telling everyone, oh, this is what you should do, this is, we should follow Christ, we should do this and this and this. And the first thing that he should do at the time was to look within. To go through all the things that he had in his heart, all the feelings that he had in his heart, and apply Jesus' love there, not onto others. And that was immediate, right? As soon as that encounter happened, he went blind. So thanks for bringing that up. It's truly a good reflection, right? Every time we learn something new, how about applying it to us first, and then going to others. Because like we said before, the biggest beneficiary of us loving someone is our own selves. And the last part from Christ again on the Sermon on the Mount, and this is very well known, he said, you have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. So this is what was the common knowledge before Christ, was to hate your enemy. And then he came to give a new interpretation. He said, but I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. So almost 2,000 years ago, he was already trying to instill that love, that unconditional love to whoever, not necessarily just our friends, but our enemies as well. So that, I'll end there because we're at time. Christ is a great example, I guess, to all of us, but he's not the only one, right? And even though if we can't relate to Christ because he's too far away, or you haven't been with him for too long, I'm sure we can think of others who have exemplified a level of love that we can be inspired by. Well, that's what I wanted to bring. Any questions or comments or ideas? I didn't pose too many questions. It wasn't that interactive. But yeah.
I just want to say that when you think about love everyone, love your enemies, it doesn't mean we have to agree with them. Like loving them doesn't mean that, oh, I don't see the wrongdoings, but it can be separate, right? You can love as God loves them, as seeing the good things as Stephen saw in Paul, and go on. And if you pray, you're helping them develop too, like get better. Same way as other people who love us, even though they don't agree with us, they see our wrongdoings as well, but they still love us anyway. So, for me, it makes it a bit easier to see that if I love someone, doesn't mean that the person is perfect, or it doesn't make any mistakes yet. But the love is separate from the other things, and everyone will get there, even us, even me.
Yeah, thank you.
I think a good example is like in the passage that Victor brought, like Maria Magdala. You are still condemning the sin, you're just not condemning the sinner. The sinner is all of us. So it's like you separate, this is wrong, and now from now on it's on you. Go and sin no more, so you take responsibility and accountability to change your behavior.
And I guess what we're talking about here is not necessarily the action that you should take when someone does something wrong to you, whether you're going to teach them or sue them or whatever it may be. That's not what we're talking about here. That's the second thing that happens. That's the action. What we're talking about here is what is the feeling that comes to us as that is happening, right? And how can we, evolve that feeling so that we can love even though we're doing wrong.
Yeah, we
Great.
will save ourselves from all high BP, stress, cortisol, all kind of things.
It's only
Right.
your benefit, right?
Like in corporate, they say, oh, let's not talk about the person. Let's talk about the problem. I say, yeah, let's talk about the problem.
Yeah.
Let's dissociate the person from it.
Yeah.
So that's such a good way. Like, it's the same thing, basically.
Yeah.
What?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Misty. Perfect. For those of you who haven't been here, we do our final prayer, and then we have our passes, which are behind you. And then we'll call you to come. And then afterwards, outside there, that's where you can find the cake. If you want some cake, and my mom will be there to help you out. And that's it. Okay, let's finish with a prayer. Let's close our eyes. Let us elevate our thoughts to that example of love that we hold dear in our lives. And we ask you, Master, we ask you, Christ, that you can help us. Transform every time we have hatred in our heart. Help us bring love. Every time we have discontent, help us bring some peace, some lightness, some ease. We thank you, Christ, for the opportunity to be here together, learning from you till this day. And may we be able to find not only in you examples of love, but in everyone around us. so we can see the world with your lenses, and the lenses of love and compassion and peace. May your love surround us today, tomorrow, and forever.